Ready to go. I don't think anybody else is going to turn up, are they?
Okay, the Kevin's just confirmed that we're now the webcast is now live.
Welcome everyone to an additional meeting for Transport for the North Scrutiny Committee. The item on the agenda today is the approval of the freight and logistics strategy that we need to approve in time for the main board meeting that will occur, I think, on the 30th of the month. So thank you very much for joining this additional meeting. As a matter of interest, Gary, do I have to do apologies? I guess I do. So apologies.
Yeah, if you could.
First off.
Yeah. So, Chair, we've had apologies from Councillor Furneaux, Councillor Hughes and Councillor Southard, Councillor Jones, Councillor Johnson and Martin Tugwell.
Right, okay, thank you very much. Can I just say, Gary, if anybody joins the meeting while we're doing the intro, they will please let them in and just note a time of which they join. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine, Chair.
Okay. Declarations of interest, please. None. Oh, okay. So no declarations of interest. There'll be no minutes to read, will there, from this one, Gary? Is that correct? Gary?
So I just lost that, Chair. So what did you say?
We have no minutes to approve at this meeting.
No, we'll put the last minutes plus these minutes together into the next meeting in June.
Okay, in which case I'd like either Lucy or Tim to step forward and present this document, please.
Thank you, Paul. I'm off camera today, so I've just got some connection issues. I think I'm delighted that actually Lucy is now able to present this work, because this is work that she's put a lot of work and effort into and has come together really well. I will just start by saying I'm very grateful to the committee for reconvening and considering this before the board, but also for the committee's input into the development of the freight strategy. We've had a number of good sessions with you, both in the early formation, but also in reviewing both the draft before it went to before the board and the final version before we went out to consultation. So thank you for that. And Lucy, if you're ready, I'll hand over to you to do a quick introduction.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think Tim's covered off the first things I was going to say, which is really good. And thanking you all for what you've already inputted so far. I know we've had lots of discussion around things like rail reopenings and different rail issues as well as the road. And that they've all sort of fed into my thought process, and I've processed those, and we've hopefully come to a strategy that kind of encompasses that without being too prescriptive. So in terms of what's happened since I last spoke to you, you've seen previous iterations of the work, and we've discussed the process behind that. And I've pulled together, alongside partners and alongside officers from your authorities that you represent, I've pulled together quite a high-level strategy. We got some work done on the evidence base by a company called Atkins, and that was incredibly detailed. And there was a lot of analysis on, and it was before the integrated rail plan was published, there was a lot of analysis on various different areas that I was able to use, because some of it was generic, and then a lot of it was about what does the policy environment look like around freight and logistics from a national perspective, and what do we really need to focus in on the north. And so I was able to draw those sort of conclusions and then shape a strategy that I thought represented the needs of the freight and logistics industry. We then went to consultation. So we had a very there was two sides to look at this. There was a very fancy electronic virtual consultation room. Now, if any of you engaged with that, I hope you did, because it was TFN haven't operated anything like this before. But whenever I'm consulting, and if I move into a consultation phase, my favourite part of that is going to talk to people like you, sort of out and about and working out, studying the environment that we're in, and working out what the area needs and what your specific issues are. Which in the pandemic times we're at the moment, we just can't do that. So I asked for a virtual environment whereby we could display the different sections of the strategy. So if people were interested in roads, all they had to do was look at roads. If they were interested in rail, they just looked at the rail bit. But also there was the entire strategy. So when there were some certain people who thought, I want to look at everything, and I don't want to do all the clicking through, and they could do that as well. So what it did was it enabled, in a virtual way, people to it respected different learning styles, in the sense that if people wanted to read everything they could, it met people where they needed to be in terms of engaging with our work. So I was really pleased with that. And from that, people didn't particularly enjoy using this individual questions. We got over 500 responses in terms of what people thought of the strategy in either sections or in totality. And from that, I realised, and we've changed it to reflect this, was decarbonisation, which I thought we had a section on it, and I thought I got it right, but I hadn't. So we've drawn out, strengthened the objectives, and drawn out more activity on decarbonisation of the freight logistics industry. So that was one of the main things that. I thought I'd got it right, but we hadn't, so I've changed that. So we hopefully have got it right now. And then the recommendations are very detailed. Now, there's two schools of thought. There's like, either do you want headline recommendations so we can then develop that more further later on, which is a good school of thought, or do I want to put as much detail up front so people can see what I'm actually planning to do, and then I can develop a work programme from that level of detail. So I went for the option B. So I've got quite significantly detailed recommendations that we have summarised for future reports, but in the strategy, they're nice and detailed. So there's 4 areas that we've split them up into, which I think are the four main areas that we need to consider. So we've got the decarbonisation comes first. No surprises there, from given what I've just said. We've got areas on warehousing and warehousing connectivity. I know that DFT and others are interested in how we as a subnational transport body and other subnational transport bodies across England can work together and look at how we can do more strategic spatial planning of warehousing capacity and capability, because it's a national issue. So if you're relying on each individual local authority through their work on local plans, then that's great, because they've got their own. They know exactly what their area is. I know from officers they will have thought about the wider area, but if you've got somebody else from a different level, it might help planners in looking at that more strategically, which I think can only have benefit. But how you get that to happen, we need to think about more carefully. So there's the warehousing bit, and also getting them multimodally connected. So where you've got the right cargo and the right warehousing styles, if you can then enable that to be rail connected if it's needed, or if the market wants it to be, and make that easy to happen. I mean, we all know, I think I've spoken about the Heinz example, where there was a factory in Wigan is next to the rail lines. They've chopped a few trees back, and then they're able to put stuff on the railway through working with Network Rail to get the right access. Basically, the train pulls up, they drop the containers on, and off they go. Beans for everybody. So that's kind of what that's the kind of thing. Can we make that happen more easily in terms of planning and all the rest of it? The third area is capacity and capability, which is something that we've touched on in quite a lot of detail. What about the capacity, about capability of the network, where can we get more freight on, which lines would we benefit from having reopened, all that kind of debate can sit within those areas. And then there's the national activity that we do as well. I don't just sit within the north. There's a lot of national activity that, because of the the nature of our network, for freight logistics especially, it doesn't, lorries don't just appear on our border and we're interested. They must have come from somewhere, and then they're going to go somewhere as well. So especially flows that go into Scotland, into Wales, the new train and the new flows that are coming out of Doncaster Airport, linking up to Teesport and beyond. But then especially the new, in my time at TFN, the new service from say Scotland into Liverpool, serving the Americas for whiskey and shortbread, is my other favourite example that I'm hoping to be able to use a different one soon. But that's my other favourite example of that. So there's lots of people keep appearing. So hopefully they've heard the bit of my sort of opening introduction. But I think so. In terms of how do we measure the success, is the next kind of big question. There's two schools of thought. So do we think about what the freight industry is actually doing itself, as in how many lorries have we got on the road, how many trains are there, which is market driven. So that information is, and it's not easily accessible. So we've done a lot of work we've got a team monitoring and evaluation piece of work with our researchers. Now they keep coming to me going, it must be easier to do this than it seems, and it really isn't. When you think about the Office of Rail and Road have only just released their the last quarter of 2021 data about what freight flows have been moving on the road and rail. You think, well, that's, if they can't do it before now, it's going to be really difficult for me to get live information without having spoken to a load of private sector hauliers and train operators and what's your performance information. I'm not certain that they'd want to give that to me without the data cleansing and the issues surrounding that, and also the commerciality. Now, when you also think about what would we actually do with that information, I'm not certain. I think it's nice to know when at the moment the freight traffic we know through the pandemic that the freight traffic was the first to return to full capacity before people were brave enough to travel. We definitely needed all those supplies being moving around the network. That's nice to know, but would we have wanted to know that on a monthly basis? I'm not so certain, and I don't know what the value of that would be. However, I do think the performance of, when you think about the set of recommendations, I'm going to move that into a work programme, and I think monitoring me and TFN on how we deliver those actions, and we maybe come back every 6 months to demonstrate the progress that we've made against that plan, so we can share the activity as we go forward. I think that's probably more valuable, and it will give you an indication about how well we're doing, and is there any other new activity that we're planning. So I think I'm going to pause there. I do apologise if while I'm not talking you hear overexcitable Cavapoo, because she's just woken up. So you might get some squeaks. So I'm very sorry. She's just started to play with the toys. So I do apologise. Bless you. So I will hand back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Yes, we've gone on quite a journey with this report, so thank you very much. I'll just make a couple of comments before I open it up for questions. So yes. First of all, I'd like to thank you very much for the detail, and actually just outlining the way you've got your evidence base, and you've done very well to get 500 responses. I was involved on a consultation a couple of years ago where we actually got 15,000 responses. And yes, that blew the council's mind. We'd never had anything more than about 50 or 60. So 500 is considered outstanding. So well done on that. Wow. I like the fact that you've reacted to it, particularly around the decarbonisation. I think that's something that's coming to most people, that we are getting more and more information about that. I like your 4 key points. A couple of things I'd just like to add. One of the things is, and I'm thinking more about truckers than so because road haulage is the bigger thing in the north of England anyway. And I noticed you make a comment about promoting because of a scarcity of people. So I sort of think that there's maybe room for improved facilities. So maybe there's transport hubs where there's a move to improve facilities there, as well as so that either rest areas or sort of eating and all those required things that people have to do, that they don't necessarily have those facilities in the cab. So I think there's something about it. And then I like the connectivity on warehousing, because I think that has to work, and it has, so whether it's a truck connecting to a train stop or a factory straight onto the train, et cetera, et cetera. So I love that piece. And then going forward, you're going to be asking the customer for forecasts on freight, et cetera. And asking the customer, to make sure that we're going in the right direction, so you're getting you're getting feedback. To me, all feedback is good, even if it's not what you want to hear. At least it tells you the right thing, or it tells you if things aren't going the way you expected to. And then my last comment is really, is there not a freight body or a couple of freight bodies that you could actually collaborate with on a higher level, where they're representing their members, rather than actually talking to people, the private hauliers, who may well think that they're, I still work in the retail trade, and we won't, so we won't even tell you what time we're opening. That's how secret we. Do you know what I mean? So the rivalries take a while to break down. So, but as I say, I felt I'm very pleased with what I'm seeing here. I'm sure that we'll all want to add something else. So I'm going to open it up to the floor. So I'm looking for hands so that I can offer people. And Councillor Davison, you don't disappoint.
I'll try not. Yeah, I think. Well, first of all, Lucy, well done. It's a great document.
Thank you.
I think you've probably covered the vast majority of the things that we've had concerns about. I think there's a couple of omissions. I wouldn't suggest that we amend this document, but looking forward to future documents, I think we seem to have rolled over and accepted the cancellation of the Leeds leg of the HS2, and that had a huge bearing on freight, insofar as it took the high-speed trains away from the existing lines. And it doesn't matter what we do in terms of those routes, they're basically at capacity in signalling terms, aren't they? They ain't going to get no more trains down there, and that's something that we can't alter. Without HS2 going further forward, I think we're really hamstrung, and I would have liked to have seen us continuing to bang the drum. But obviously there's a bit of politic involved in that, because you're treading a fine line with government, really, as to getting support. So I understand perhaps why there's not any references, but nonetheless, I think who knows where government goes in the future. They might see sense when all the debts of the country have been paid off, goodness knows. The other thing I think was missing on there was we've talked about W10 gauge and perhaps larger gauges and electrification, or perhaps non-electrification if we can get the technology. For decarb, although I'm not convinced we're a decade away from that yet. There's too much going off, I think, in terms of the credentials of hydrogen, the issues of hydrogen, whether batteries will ever be big enough to be able to pull lorries about and trains. So I think if we really got any sort of short to medium term aspirations for decarbonisation, it's difficult to not still push for overhead electrification.
Yes, okay.
That's my view. The other thing I think that's missing is line speed. Now, if I look particularly, and I've been involved in a lot of line speed improvement projects over the years, railways, and I know if you look at the new Freeport that's hopefully going to be fantastically successful on the Humber,
it's fantastic.
It's going to rely on that link basically from Cleethorpes to Doncaster.
Yes.
So we've improved the gauge, which is great.
Yeah.
But obviously it's not electrified and perhaps never will be. But
and you've got an average speed now about 40 miles an hour, haven't you? So I do from living there. I know there are areas where you just drop down to 10 miles an hour because of the heavy haul stuff that's gone on that line so far.
It is pretty grim, really. And obviously, obviously freight trains run at a slower speed anyway on the railways.
Yeah.
One of the issues with trying to thread them in between, faster passenger trains, but But obviously, there's been no investment in line speed, really.
No.
Line at all. They've had a few goes around Kidley Bridge at trying to solve that issue, but, never succeeded.
No, it's the geology around there that's terrible. It's all soft soil. It's all soft, gooey soil, isn't it? So it means
not very good, yeah. It's all canals and boggy, but it's not impossible.
No.
So I think the other thing that struck me was, if you look at the intermodal map, it really makes you realise how terribly poorly we're serviced by intermodals. And
yes.
I see within the report that there are, maybe at the most half a dozen new proposals. It's pretty low though, isn't it? And I have to say, when I came into North Lincolnshire, we'd been developing, prior to my tenure as councillor, we've been developing the old Normby Park Steelworks site.
Yes.
I think intermodal, which was rail linked, of course.
Yeah, it would be, yeah. Yeah.
It was rail linked, and Biffa have used that rail link for bringing waste into Roxby.
Yeah.
But there was never any consideration by the council to make any part of that intermodal, which is a real shame.
Yeah.
I came along too late, and I wonder how many councils really, when they're doing the local plans, really consider making provision for intermodals. I think it's in the too hard to do box. In my time in railways, I went to many factories, many sites that were right next to a railway line.
Yeah.
And really wanted to get a rail link in. It was usually thwarted by Network Rail, normally due to signalling constraints, as much as the actual physical permanent way installation. So there's work to do on that. So I think we could do more in terms of local authorities, recognising the opportunities that intermodal brings.
Yeah.
On the road side of it, one thing that's always struck me is that there's only maybe more sections, but the only section I know of where HGVs are restricted from the middle lane, if you like, of a 3-lane highway is a stretch of the M11. There may be more.
Okay.
But obviously, you go across to France and parts of Europe, you do not see HGVs in the outer lanes.
No.
And that has a colossal effect on both, traffic flows and congestion. And congestion, of course, leads to pollution.
Yeah.
So I think, I would like to see some more thought given to that kind of initiative. And that's a behavioural change, because it might switch hauliers to run more through the night, but rather than clogging up the motorways through the day. Yeah.
I thought that was a really good point. I think when you think about, I personally, we've recently done a lot more driving in France to see, because my parents are over there as well. So I think what strikes me about different geographies, like compared to us, there's just far less, because it's less dense, isn't it? There's less people sort of concentrated on the road network. So I always feel that even the main kind of arterial roads are much more free flowing, just because of the way that people, the sort of population centres accessing it are different. So I think there's going to be a balance about how we achieve that in our area in the UK, because of the concentration of people in such a small space. My parents always say they feel overwhelmed when they drive on our road networks, because they're so used to everything being much more sort of geographically spaced out. So I think that's a really interesting point. So how we do that and how we translate that into sort of the way that we use our roads is an interesting. We need to think about that more.
Yeah,
I think that's a really good point.
So I think, again, it's a great document. I'm happy to support it.
Thank you.
And obviously going forward,
there's a lot to do. Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think when Martin speaks about this, he talks about this is kind of the end of the beginning, because we're setting out what we're going to do in future, but getting to this point is really important, so we can begin the work. So the more that we talk about what we're going to do, the less we can actually do. So I think this is a good milestone to get to, and then we can think about get our teeth into some of this detail going forward, which is all really helpful.
Now, I know you've probably spoken to Paul mentioned other bodies. Obviously, the main one banging the drum for rail freight is the Rail Freight Group.
Yes, I know Maggie really well, Maggie Simpson. So yes, we are very plugged into that, and also Mag Simpson from Logistics UK and people from the road haulage. So I take that on board. We kind of need some, like a group over and above the Northern Ports Association, because we're still working with the ports. So the 4 kind of major ports, which probably isn't as inclusive as across the north as some people might like, but it is the four main players. So Humber, Tees, Tyne, and Liverpool. When we get together and we discuss things as and when we need to. I don't have specifically scheduled meetings. It's when we all think this would be a great time to get together because we've got an issue. So we could probably do something similar with the other bodies, membership bodies, which makes quite a lot of sense as well.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davison. Well prepared. I'm glad you read it twice. Councillor Fletcher, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Hi. Morning, Lucy. Morning.
Hello.
First of all, reading through this document, we have references to W12 and references to W10.
Right.
Does Transport for the North have a policy on whether they're going for W10 or W12? Because to me, it would be very costly if we started clearing for W10 and then a few years later we started clearing for W12. So could I have clarification first on what our current policy is?
I think in terms of about W10, W12, it's about the specific traffics that are actually going to be on that network. I think if it's very, very easy to do, say it's just like a matter of a bit of steel sticking out under a bridge and we get to W10 really easily, then those things we'd like to see achieved. But I think overall, to move the largest intermodal traffic, W12 is where we'd like to be. So I think the priority overall is W12, but where we can where we can achieve W10, because that means that all that does is you can move containers that are not refrigerated. So that enables far more traffic to move on that bit of network than it would be to W12. But the gold standard is W12, but W10 enables you to move some containers on that network. So I think that it's a balance between the traffic that you've got the demand for, and then the operators and also the shippers say yes, we need that. We need to have that ability for that because we know that we've got forecast traffic coming in from X, Y, and Z. I think it's especially across the Pennines. I think it's W12 because you want to have the ability to move foodstuffs from places like Europark in sort of North East Links that do a massive amount of fish processing and food processing to Liverpool and onwards. So I think that getting that connectivity across the Pennines is a priority across there because that will enable the most traffic to move. Elsewhere, I think it's where you have to just keep an eye on what's actually going on in the industry and what people actually want. So I think it's a fine balance, but I think in terms of TransPennine, it's W12, as that's what even before I was here, I argued that point. But that's where I think we need to be.
Thank you. So W12 will that take the 9'6" containers?
But W10
won't.
No, I think they both. No, it's the. There's an extra unit on top of the containers for the W12. So I think the 9'6" go on the can achieve W10 in places, but I think W12 overall gives you a wider variety of style of container.
Thank you. Looking at the map, there doesn't seem to be a service now from Trafford Park to Newcastle. Now, of course, going back to when I worked, the Trafford Park Newcastle always went via the Woodhead Tunnel. And of course, when they shut the Woodhead Tunnel, it had to go via Witchner for quite some time until they finally dropped the track on one of the Diggle tunnels.
Yeah.
But for some reason, there's no Trafford Park Newcastle service running now. Is that correct?
It was, well, in terms of the analysis, when we prepared the intermodal map, that would be the case because we looked at all where the services were running. But I can query it for future iterations of any map that we do for intermodal. Okay, so can I take that away as a thing to think about? Because that's something that is either missing but we can think about that if we do a further iteration of that map in future.
Thank you. And now, going back to capacity issues, basically we've got via Hebden Bridge or via Diggle. That's all we've got.
Yeah.
And I do have concerns as to just how we're going to get a pint into a half-pint pot. Now, in the past, I know Manchester area, they've called I think Sheffield as well, they've called for the reopening of the line, Woodhead Tunnel, which is basically is reopening between Hadfield and Penistone. Is this still being looked at, or is that completely a no-go? Because we do need extra capacity, and this report shows that.
We do need extra capacity. I think in terms of the way that I've worded the recommendations, we've spoken about this specific service before. I think because we don't want to be, because we as an organisation, and I might sneeze in a minute, so I do apologise. We as an organisation do recognise that it's actually important that we look at the entire network and improving capacity and capability. But if I start calling for loads and loads and loads and millions and millions and millions and millions of pounds of investment in terms of reopening reopening lines, at this point, I think the credibility for what we're trying to achieve may be lost, because we will get criticised. Now, in terms of the recommendations, I talk about looking at supporting line reopenings and other activities in terms of rail investment that we can do in future. So we don't rule it out, but we can still talk about these opportunities as and when we know that the fiscal opportunity kind of represents itself. So if there is opportunity, we can match it with what the investment that we think needs to be seen. So I don't want to rule things like that out, but I also want to make sure we're credible and we're sensible about what we're trying to achieve and what we set out as our work programme, so people don't think it's sort of too sort of pie in the sky, if you know what I mean. So we want to be sensible and credible, but I also want to leave that door open so we can do that kind of thing in the future.
Thank you. Now, earlier this month, electrification has been approved between Manchester and Staley Bridge.
Yes.
Which means that there's going to have to be some bridges raised or tracks lowered.
Yes.
Which itself will lead to delay. Now, it's unclear on this report where either the W10 or the W10 gauging will be. But if it's on one of the lines between either Manchester Victoria or Manchester Piccadilly and Staley Bridge,
yes,
are we looking at ensuring that when these bridges are raised or whatever, they'll be raised for K10 or K12, hopefully, as well as the electric overhead wires? Is that being looked at?
Yes, that's part of the Transpennine route upgrade activity, and there's significant resource going into that, both at Transport for the North. I'm sorry if you can hear barking. At Transport for the North, and but also and we're sort of making sure that as we work with Great British Railways and the teams at Network Rail so far, that we keep the pressure on to see that's what we want. We want CW the bridges raised and the tracks lowered and the bridges widened to ensure we get that traffic through. But not forgetting that we want to make sure they realise that it's not just that bit of track, is it? It's about the access to that bit of track as well. So we need to make sure that the access routes onto the new any updated or upgraded infrastructure provides that access as well. So it's a wider discussion to make sure that piece of network works for everyone.
Thank you. Yes. And the only other point was, again, going back to what Councillor Davison said about these warehouses.
Yes.
Like near where I live, there's 4 large warehouses going up, being built next to a railway line.
Yeah.
The planning permission was given. They're being built. They don't yet know who's going to occupy them. Nope. There's such a demand for warehousing at the moment that the planning authorities, they're just giving permission willy-nilly to large warehouses and even when they're next to the railway line, they're not even putting any conditions on to say they should be rail connected in some way or looked at. Do we have any teeth whatsoever to actually try and ensure that planning officers take this into account?
That's a juicy question. The discussion would be spicy. So in terms of planning law and the way that this works, I think it's. I'd really want to guard against, in terms, because planning is so complex and sort of huge. I'd want to guard against the saying we should have conditions about that. But I do think that there should be something around when you're looking at the site approvals and when you're looking at planning permission for those sites. I think there's something about a local authority talking about access, and it's not just about highway access. So you get highways comments, but I think that there's also something about securing Network Rail or Great British Railways opinion to say this is so if sites want if the warehousing operators want to look at rail opportunities, the sort of doors open to look at this site and to look at the opportunities going forward. So I know from when I worked in local authority and worked with planners, there was a lot that often they would ask the question to Network Rail, if this site wants, if the person who becomes resident on this warehousing site wants to have rail access, is there the capacity on the line? Now, in terms of when you were looking at when I was working in Grimsby, Immingham and North East Links, and you've got things like the Grimsby Light Railway, then often that's a yes, because the traffic isn't, there's certain parts of the network that the traffic isn't busy. So it's often easier to get a yes in that kind of sense for the opportunity than it first seems, really. But it's just the level of investment that's then required. If Hines can do it, others can do it. When you look at the Doncaster Airport, Amazon back right onto the new airport. There's part of the rail line that's on the airport, and Amazon were building a few years ago. They were building a new warehouse. I also know they were doing test services. They were bolting a couple of containers onto the end of the IKEA train to see if it worked for them. Now, those kind of things work really nicely because people can do a bit of a market test. Can we do this operation? And can we? Is there enough? Do we specifically need lorries because we need to unload, say, half a load here and half a load somewhere else? So are we using the lorry like a mini consolidation centre, or is that container, once it's sealed, going somewhere and it's just going somewhere? So it's looking at the traffic, looking at the opportunity, but also making sure people are being proactive. So I think sometimes that does happen. It might just happen behind closed doors, but I think it's also getting GBR to say, yeah, this is important enough for us to openly support this kind of activity, especially since they're going to have rail freight targets. So they need to meet those targets somehow.
So Lucy, and Rod, can I just interrupt for a moment as chair? What I'd like to suggest is, and perhaps you can elaborate on this. I believe that perhaps Transport for the North should write a letter to Network Rail based on what we've just discussed, so you might have to watch the action highlights later, just to recall everything that you've committed yourself to, Lucy. So we get you to commit on air so that so that we can point back to it. But the other thing is that if we get Network Rail to agree that they are perhaps participate in any intermodal hubs, that we then, after we get that letter back, we perhaps copy that letter to all local authorities for their planning department, such that they actually consider putting rail into as a statutory consultee for these areas, or even a voluntary consultee.
They will be a statutory consultee. Yeah, they will be.
But
if the site's nearer.
Yeah, but there's nothing like belts and braces, in my opinion.
No.
And we need to encourage modal shift. So I just wonder whether that's, Tim will probably come in and say you've got enough to do. However, I just wonder if that might be a way, because I'd like to put that into, I would be putting this into a summary at the end if you think this is a possibility.
Yeah, we can definitely draft a letter. I think Tim would support that. So yeah, I think I can definitely pull something together around rail connected warehousing, around the making sure that Great British Railways or Network Rail are seeking sort of a proactive relationship with local planning authorities to look at all the relevant opportunities. I can say something like that, which I think is both in line with their role as a statutory consultee, but in terms of promoting more intermodal rail traffic. Does that sound about, have I given you sort of something?
Yeah, no, that's fine. I can pick that up and run with it at the end. I'm sorry, Councillor Fletcher, if you had anything else or not. I just wanted to try and sort of amplify and get some of what you were talking about, actually get an action point from it that we can actually hopefully make a difference somewhere.
Well, that's what we're here for, to make a difference like that.
Yes.
The only question I really have now is, do our recommendations, in view of what Lucy has said quite some time ago, do our recommendations emphasise the fact that we would like a W12 gauge clearance over the Pennines? Sure they do.
I think in terms of the there's a recommendation that I talk around the Transpennine route upgrade, which is that specific issue. So I think they probably do, but I'll make when I develop the work programme, I'll make sure that's specifically articulated in the detail, so it's nice and clearly set out. Is that
so? It
okay?
says W12.
Yeah, so we get the right gauge in the right places. So I'll make sure
brilliant.
that's articulated rather
Thank you
than,
very much. That's brilliant.
Then we can set that out.
Thanks, Lucy. Thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Lucy? I'm not seeing any. Well, I have a question for you, Lucy. Obviously, the integrated rail plan came out when you're partway through this. So how much has the integrated rail plan have you had time to take the influence from that, or have you completely integrated it?
Oh, right. So that's quite. I mean, I think there's a separate piece of work on the integrated rail plan that Tim Foster's leading on. So he may pop up in a minute and give you a flavour. But I think in terms of where I stand on freight and logistics, I think that regardless of what has been published, I think there's still certain things that we would argue for. So things like gauge clearance, about connectivity, about and around analysing the future demand for rail traffic. So I think there's so many proactive things that we can do to move on from the debate on maybe what was lacking or what we haven't got. That we as TFN are gonna move into that phase. So think about what we can do rather than what we haven't got. And I think that's where I favour standing. Okay. So we can be positive in moving forward.
No, okay, I get that. So Tim, do you want to come in and just have you got any comment on this before I sort of try and sum up?
No, on the IRP specifically. No.
Well, it's just on the integration of the IRP and what all the work that Lucy's done here. And I know it's not just Lucy. I'm just using Lucy as the figurehead. I know she's chased loads of people around and made them do work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair and members, for the discussion. I won't add too much. I think what's clear in the IRP is the level of investment in the North Rail network isn't going to be sufficient to deliver on freight ambitions. And again, as Lucy said, we've got some work in the background trying to make sense of what's in the IRP and the implications for freight. But I think we can all see the level of investment isn't there, and I think particularly the as was said earlier in the call. The removal of the Eastern leg has some real implications for capacity, just generally on rail, but particularly for freight through South Yorkshire and out to the eastern ports, which is something that we've been pushing for a while. So we know there isn't enough in the IRP. We also know that there are still some uncertainties in the IRP in terms of what is being delivered. And thirdly, we also know that the IRP isn't the end of the story. We are still waiting for sort of confirmation of the rail network enhancements pipeline, the RNet process to be published, so we can see what's formally in the pipeline for rail. There will need to be more investment, more strategic planning, and work to do, and that's what the TFN will do as part of its new co-sponsor role, but we'll also do it as part of looking at the new strategic transport plan that we talked to the committee about on Thursday last week. So it's I in some ways, the recommendations in the freight strategy are deliberately designed to be a little bit future-proof, because although we've had the IRP, there's still a number of steps to go before we get to any clarity, particularly, I think, Chair. And our intention, and again, we will be talking to the committee about this in June when you meet again, is that in the next iteration of the strategic transport plan, our intention is to be extremely clear about what is required, not just over the next 5 years, but over the next 10 years and beyond, to deliver that connectivity. So the ambition will remain. As Lucy said, we're now trying to get much more realistic and more focused on what needs to happen in the short term to deliver on both the economic agenda, but also on decarbonisation. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, just before I sum up, is there anybody else wishing to ask a question? Okay, so my summary is going to be a bit bulky here, and I welcome any supporting questions or comments, because obviously if these get minuted, they're in all our names. So first of all, I believe that we as a committee support the report. I have not heard any dissensions today on that. So I think the first thing is that we need to say that we will be supporting this report. So thank you very much, Lucy. I'm not seeing anybody flashing hands up or waving at me madly on the screen.
Thank you very much.
But now I have 10 points that I want to make. The first one is that the IRP, or the Integrated Rail Report that has come out, and in some ways is subsequent from your report, so there's a timing issue, has meant that there is reduced capacity that the board needs to be aware of, and at the moment there would not be sufficient funds to deliver all of the freight ambition that Transport for the North has. So that's point number one. I presume, Gary, you'll go back over this later. Point number two is that we obviously expect the right gauges to be in the right place, with a preference to W12, I think it is. Point three is, going forward, the technology may be electrical or non-electrical, depending on whether hydrogen moves to the fore, or whether it's electrical batteries, or whether it's electrification. Point number four is, obviously, we need to be looking at line speed improvement, when it comes to rail. And point five really is actually my letter to the authority, to Network Rail and local authorities. So in other words, it's how do we deal with intermodal hubs? There's two issues with here. There's not a lot of intermodal hubs across the whole of the North network, but the second point is that when planning applications come up for warehousing that's in the proximity of rail, perhaps we're not taking full advantage of the opportunity that yields. Therefore, we'd like Lucy to draft a letter, A, to Network Rail, and then B, to the local authorities, depending on what how Network Rail respond. 6, there's an item about behavioural change, which potentially might mean that freight has to become a 24-hour business as opposed to a majority during daylight hours. That was the point that Councillor Davison brought up. At the moment, there's a tendency for during the day, whether there's any behavioural changes that we can create.
Could I just respond on that, the way you just put that point across? I think,
yeah, please,
if that's all right.
Yep.
In terms of the whole 24-hour operation business, I think that the freight industry does think it is that at the moment. In terms of the way that the trains run on the network, the reason that they will run at certain times is because of when ships arrive and how they can then get access to the network, but also the fact that the railway in certain times closes at night to allow for what's the word for repairing and mending? Maintenance.
Yeah.
Maintenance.
Engineering works.
Engineering works. There we go. That is a massive kind of, because we require the railway to be a 24-hour operation, which would probably be more complicated in terms of how we see that going forward. So I think that bit is. Obviously, the first 5 points I really like, but I think in terms of behavioural change, I'll be very careful about how I word that. It'll be like maximising access to the network to get trains to run.
So why don't we just change it to we need to look at how we maximise access to the network?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
I'd be much more comfortable with that rather in terms of an industry perspective. If that's
Perfect.
all right with you.
No, I'm watching for councillors on the call to shout at me, and at the moment nobody's shouted at me. So point number 7 is that I'd like to recommend, and I hope that you actually have regular meetings with all these different freight bodies, whether it's the rail freight group and the freight haulage people. But the other group that you might want to involve are the LEPs, because and in mayoral authorities, LEPs tend to be under the mayor, and in my situation, I'm in a county councillor. The LEPs are separate, but within a couple of years, we might also be a mayoral authority. And I think the LEPs will have something to offer and help you here, particularly as they get involved on grants for example, building warehousing. The local LEP here just spent £10 million on improving the links between Harrogate and York on the train. So I'd like to suggest that there's an integrated collaborative approach there as well. And before I move on to point 8, I see Councillor Fletcher's back to tell me off, potentially. Councillor Fletcher.
No, I'm not to tell you off. No, it's going back to line speed. And I say I've been retired a long time now, but one of the issues on line speed, especially with freight, was heavy axle weights. And Lucy can probably confirm how up to date we are with weak bridges that trains pass over, especially 100-ton vehicles. They have to slow down, and of course the drivers, they have a form, which used to be the bane of my life, because the driver would forget the form and I'd have to fax one to him so he'd know when to slow down over which bridges. But somewhere in that, can we recommend that if there are still these weak bridges that the lines pass over, they do need to be strengthened? Otherwise, it doesn't matter how fast the line is. If you've got to slow down to 30 miles an hour, a freight train has to pass over this bridge. It's going to cause a delay, not just to the freight itself, but to other services. So whether we can possibly Lucy can give advice on how we can incorporate that into what you're saying about line speed.
I can definitely do that, and it'll just be a sort of an extension of the point. So in terms of the detail about how we do that, I will like we've discussed before. I'll make sure that's specified in the work programme so you can see that going forward. But it'll be captured in the recommendations and how we then weave all these activities together into what we deliver. So if that's all right with you, Councillor Fletcher, you seem to have disappeared, but you.
No, that's brilliant. That's
okay.
Brilliant. Thank you. Cheers. Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher, for helping somebody who doesn't know one end of a railway train to another. So thank you for that. And the weights are mind-blowing. So my point 8 would be the Trafford Park to Newcastle routing, what has happened to that? And then my final point is about capacity and the fact that we are, at the moment, we're constrained by the Hebden Bridge and the Diggle line. And therefore, when the fiscal opportunity appears, this might be the capacity here might be a priority.
So that's the Penistone line, isn't it? So looking at issues around the Penistone line, yeah.
So those are 9 points. So Lucy, you don't seem to be too phased by those. So
I've written them all down, and I think you said there were 10.
Yeah, I know, but I realised that I'd already written number 5 and number 10 with the same point.
That's cool. Okay.
So that's that. So effectively, what I'm saying is we're passing the report, but we want those 9 points to be noted, of which item 5 is actually a letter. So there's really 8 points plus a letter, really.
So what I'll do is I'll summarise that into, because we have to show, so in the board report, we'll want to evidence that we've spoken to you about this. So I'll try and summarise. I'll either put 9 points in or I'll summarise the themes from the discussion, so you can see the impact of the scrutiny debate in the board paper, so board can sort of see what we've spoken about, and then it's evidence that we followed like scrutiny first, which I'm quite passionate about.
As I say, I think the committee generally believes your report is very good, very practical and pragmatic. But I just feel that these things need to be noted as we brought them out in the discussion.
Cool.
So I would just ask my fellow councillors, are you happy with how I've summarised? Is there anybody unhappy? I suppose is more to the point. Or have I got anything wrong, either technically or what I might best describe as politically? Okay, and Tim, are you happy with the comments that we've made?
I think you're on mute, Tim, as in Tim, do you mean Tim Foster?
Foster, yes, Tim Foster.
Yeah, I think he's on mute. Okay. Oh, he's not. I'm sure he will be. I'm sure.
Well, okay.
I'm sure he will be.
So I'm just going to check in with Gary. Gary, is there anything else that we need? I don't believe there's any other business, and I'd like to close the meeting with your permission. So, Gary, are we in a position to do that now?
Yeah, I think we've got everything we need. So, yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay, look, it's 10:59. It's 10:59, so I'd like to thank you all for attending. Thank you very much. I am sorry that we weren't able to get this into the last meeting. However, we've had some very fruitful debate and actually I think some very important additions from the people that we've got some really excellent technical specialists on the call within our councillor base, and that's a resource that we should never, ever underestimate. So look, thank you very much. And I'd just like to say